The freezing December wind cut through Rosalie Anderson's threadbare dress like 1,000 knives as she stood in the muddy street of Custer, South Dakota, watching her stepfather haggle with a man over the price of a chestnut mare. She had endured 3 years of servitude since her mother died, cooking and cleaning for a man who saw her as nothing more than a burden, but she never imagined it would come to this. The mare whinnied and stamped its hooves, and Rosalie felt a strange kinship with the animal, both of them being appraised like property in the bitter cold of 1876. "The horse ain't worth more than $40, her stepfather Jacob Winters said, spitting tobacco juice into the frozen mud. "She's got a bad temperament and won't take a saddle easy." The horse trader, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, shook his head firmly. "This here's a fine animal. I'll take 60, not a penny less." Rosalie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. The December sky hung low and gray over the Black Hills, promising snow before nightfall. Custer was a rough mining town that had sprung up after gold was discovered 2 years earlier, filled with prospectors, gamblers, and men running from their pasts. It was no place for a young woman alone, but Rosalie had nowhere else to go. "Tell you what," Jacob said, his eyes gleaming with a maliciousness Rosalie had come to recognize. "I'll trade you something better than cash. I got me a girl who can cook, clean, mend, and do whatever else needs doing. You take her, and the horse is mine." The words hit Rosalie like a physical blow. She stepped backward, her boots slipping in the mud. "No," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the wind. The horse trader looked her up and down with the same appraising eye he had given the mare. "She looks half-starved. She eats like a bird. Won't cost you nothing to keep her fed, and she works hard, I'll give her that." Jacob grabbed Rosalie's arm and pulled her forward roughly. "What do you say? Fair trade?" Rosalie tried to pull away, but Jacob's grip was iron. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "Please," she said, looking at her stepfather with desperate eyes. "Please don't do this." "You got no say in the matter," Jacob hissed. "Your ma left you in my care, and I'll do with you as I see fit. You've eaten my food and slept under my roof for 3 years, time you earned your keep." The horse trader scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I don't know. Taking on another mouth to feed seems like more trouble than it's worth." "Then the deal's off," Jacob said, starting to turn away, though his grip on Rosalie never loosened. "Wait now, hold on." The trader held up a hand. "I suppose a woman around the place might be useful. My cabin could use a good cleaning, and I can't remember the last time I had a decent meal. All right, you got yourself a deal." Rosalie felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "No, you cannot do this. I am a person, not property." Jacob backhanded her across the face, and she tasted blood. "You'll mind your tongue, girl. You belong to Mr. Patterson here now, and you'll do as he says, same as you did for me." Before Rosalie could protest further, Patterson had tied a rope around her wrist like she was livestock. Jacob mounted the chestnut mare without a backward glance, riding away down the main street of Custer without a single word of goodbye or regret. Rosalie watched him go, tears freezing on her cheeks, unable to believe this was happening. Patterson tugged on the rope. "Come on, then. My cabin's about 2 miles north of town. We'd best get moving before the snow starts." Rosalie had no choice but to follow, stumbling through the muddy street as miners and merchants watched with indifferent eyes. This was the Wild West, where women were scarce and laws were suggestions at best. No one would help her. No one would question a man's right to trade or sell as he pleased. They had just reached the edge of town when a voice rang out clear and firm. "Hold up there, Patterson." Both Rosalie and the horse trader turned to see a tall man striding toward them from the direction of the livery stable. He wore a battered Stetson hat, a sheepskin coat against the cold, and a Colt revolver strapped to his hip. His face was weathered and tanned, with sharp features and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Rosalie guessed he was somewhere in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. "What do you want, Tyrell?" Patterson asked irritably. "This ain't none of your concern." The man called Tyrell stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from Patterson to the rope around Rosalie's wrist, then to her face where a bruise was already forming from Jacob's blow. His jaw tightened. "Seems to me you just traded for a human being like she was a sack of grain." "That sits poorly with me. She was given to me fair and square in exchange for a horse," Patterson said defensively. "Her stepfather had every right to make that trade. She was his responsibility." "A person cannot be traded like property," Tyrell said, his voice dangerously quiet. "That went out with the Emancipation Proclamation more than a decade ago, in case you missed it." Patterson's face reddened. "This is different. She's family, not a slave. A man has rights over his family, not those kinds of rights." Tyrell's hand moved to rest on his gun, not threatening exactly but making his position clear. "Untie her. The hell I will. I made a fair trade and I'm keeping what's mine." Rosalie watched this exchange with growing hope, hardly daring to breathe. She had seen Tyrell around town before, usually at the livery stable where he worked breaking horses and shoeing them for the miners and ranchers. He had always been polite on the few occasions their paths had crossed, tipping his hat and offering a quiet greeting. She had never expected him to intervene on her behalf. "I will make you a counter-offer," Tyrell said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I have got $60 here, the price of that horse. I will buy her freedom from you." Patterson's eyes gleamed with greed, but he shook his head. "I already got the horse. Why would I take money for something I already paid for?" Tyrell pulled out several more bills. $100, then. That is more than you paid for the horse and more than a month's worth of her labor would bring you." "She's worth more than that to me," Patterson insisted, though his eyes never left the money. "A woman who can cook and clean and warm a man's bed is worth a lot in these parts." Tyrell's expression went cold and hard as granite. "She is not going to be warming your bed or anyone else's unless she chooses to. Now you can take this money, or you can deal with me. I promise you will not like the second option." The threat hung in the air between them. Patterson was armed, but everyone in Custer knew that Tyrell Anderson had been a sharpshooter in the Army before coming to the Black Hills. He was not a man to cross lightly. "200, Patterson said finally. $200 and she's yours." It was an outrageous sum, nearly 6 months' wages for a working man. Rosalie opened her mouth to protest, to tell Tyrell he should not waste his money on her, but he was already counting out the bills. "200 it is," Tyrell said, handing over the money. "Now untie her and get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you walk away." Patterson snatched the money, quickly untied the rope from Rosalie's wrist, and scurried away like the rat he was, disappearing into one of the saloons on Main Street. Rosalie stood there in the freezing wind, rubbing her chafed wrist, unable to find words for what had just happened. Tyrell coiled the rope and tucked it into his belt, then finally met her eyes. "Are you all right, Miss Anderson? You know my name," she said stupidly, still in shock. "It is a small town. I make it my business to know who is who." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Snow will be here soon. You need someplace warm to stay." Rosalie felt panic rise in her chest again. "I have nowhere to go. The room I had was in Jacob's boarding house, and he will never let me back there now." "You can stay at my place," Tyrell said, then quickly added at her alarmed expression. "I've got a small ranch about 3 miles out of town. There is a separate cabin that I use for storage. It is not much, but it has a stove and a bed. You would have your privacy and you would be safe. Why are you doing this? Rosalie asked, searching his face for some hint of ulterior motive. Why would you spend $200 on a stranger? Tyrell was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. Because you are worth more than 1,000 horses, Miss Anderson. No person should be traded like livestock, and no woman should be tied up and led away like you were. What your stepfather did was wrong, and what Patterson intended was worse. I could not stand by and let it happen. Rosalie felt tears spring to her eyes, but this time they were not from fear or despair. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything, Tyrell said firmly. You are free. You can stay at the cabin as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next, and there are no strings attached. I will not ask anything of you except maybe some conversation now and then, if you are willing. The first snowflakes began to fall, dusting Tyrell's shoulders and the brim of his hat. Rosalie looked at this man who had just appended his finances to save her from a terrible fate, and she felt something shift in her chest, some small seed of hope taking root. I would like that, she said softly. And I do know how to cook and clean if you would allow me to earn my keep. I will not be a burden. You would not be a burden either way, Tyrell said, but he smiled slightly. But if you want to cook, I will not complain. I have been living on beans and hardtack for too long. Come on, let us get you out of this cold. He led her to the livery stable where a sturdy bay gelding was waiting, already saddled. Tyrell helped Rosalie up onto the horse, then mounted behind her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders to shield her from the wind. As they rode out of Custer into the whitening landscape, Rosalie allowed herself to lean back slightly against his solid warmth, feeling safer than she had in 3 long years. The ranch, when they reached it, was modest but well maintained. The main cabin was small but sturdy, built of thick logs with a stone chimney. About 50 yards away stood a smaller structure, the storage cabin Tyrell had mentioned. Behind the buildings, Rosalie could see a barn and a corral where several horses moved restlessly in the falling snow. Tyrell helped her down from the gelding and led her to the smaller cabin. Inside, it was cold but dry, with a pot-bellied stove, a simple rope bed with a corn husk mattress, a table and 2 chairs. Crates and barrels lined one wall filled with supplies. I will get a fire started, Tyrell said, moving to the stove. There are blankets in that chest over there, and I will bring you some food from the main cabin. Tomorrow, if the snow lets up, we can go into town and get you some warmer clothes. I have a little money saved, Rosalie said quietly. Not much, but enough for a dress and a coat, I think. Tyrell looked at her with something like admiration. You have been planning to leave for a while, haven't you? Since the day my mother died, Rosalie admitted. I have been hiding away every penny I could get my hands on. I was going to take the stage to Cheyenne in the spring, try to find work there. But Jacob must have suspected something. That is why he did what he did today, I think. He knew I was planning to run. Well, you do not have to run anymore, Tyrell said, coaxing the fire to life in the stove. You are safe here. That night, Rosalie lay in the narrow bed, wrapped in thick wool blankets, listening to the wind howl outside. The cabin was warm from the stove, and her belly was full from the stew Tyrell had brought her. She should have been afraid, alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, but somehow she wasn't. There had been something in Tyrell's eyes when he looked at her, a kindness and respect she had rarely seen from men. She thought about what he had said, that she was worth more than 1,000 horses. Those words echoed in her mind as she drifted off to sleep, and for the first time in years, she dreamed of something other than escape. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Rosalie woke to find a basket outside her door containing fresh bread, butter, and a jar of preserves, along with a note in neat handwriting that said, "Take your time. No rush." She ate slowly, savoring each bite, then tidied the cabin and made the bed with military precision. By the time she ventured outside, the sun was well up, turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main cabin, and she could hear the sound of hammering from the direction of the barn. Rosalie made her way carefully through the snow, her thin boots soaking through almost immediately. She found Tyrell in the barn, repairing a stall door while several horses munched hay nearby. He looked up when she entered, and a smile crossed his weathered face. "Morning," he said, setting down his hammer. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," Rosalie admitted. "Thank you for the breakfast. You are welcome." Tyrell wiped his hands on his pants. "I was thinking we could head into town in an hour or so, get you those warm clothes. The snow has stopped and the road should be passable." "I would appreciate that." Rosalie hesitated, then asked, "Can I help you with anything? I meant what I said about earning my keep." Tyrell studied her for a moment. "You do not have to prove your worth to me, Miss Anderson. But if you want to help, I would not say no. The horses need water and there is a pump out back. Just be careful, the ground is slippery." They worked together in comfortable silence for the next hour, Rosalie hauling water while Tyrell finished the repairs and spread fresh hay. She found she enjoyed the physical labor, so different from the tense, fearful work she had done for Jacob. Here, there was no one criticizing her every move or raising a hand if she was too slow. When they finally headed into town, Rosalie rode behind Tyrell again, but this time she was not shivering in a thin dress. He had lent her an extra coat and a pair of thick socks, which helped considerably. The ride took about 40 minutes, and Rosalie found herself studying the back of Tyrell's head, wondering about this quiet man who had changed her life so dramatically. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they crested a hill and Custer came into view below them. "Of course." "Why did you come to South Dakota? You said you were in the army before." Tyrell was quiet for so long that Rosalie thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I was at Little Bighorn last June. I was one of the scouts who survived. After that, I could not stomach the army anymore. Too much death, too much blood spilled over land that was not ours to take in the first place. So I mustered out and came here, figuring I would try to make an honest living with horses instead of killing." Rosalie had heard about the battle at Little Bighorn, where General Custer and his men had been wiped out by Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. It had been the talk of the town for months, especially since the town itself was named after the fallen general. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That must have been horrible." "It was," Tyrell said simply, "but it taught me something important. Life is precious and short, and the things we do matter. That is why I could not walk past you yesterday. Some things are more important than money or safety or minding your own business." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable one. In town, Tyrell took her to the general store, where a kindly woman named Mrs. Chen helped Rosalie pick out 2 sturdy wool dresses, a heavy coat, proper boots, stockings, and undergarments. Rosalie tried to pay with her own saved money, but Tyrell insisted on covering the cost. "You will need that money for other things," he said when she protested. "Consider this part of getting you back on your feet." Mrs. Chen watched this exchange with knowing eyes. "You are a good man, Tyrell Anderson," she said. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so," Tyrell said quietly as they left the store, their arms full of parcels. They nearly collided with Jacob Winters on the boardwalk. Rosalie's stepfather looked at her with cold, hate-filled eyes. "You think you are something special now, girl," he spat. "You think because this cowboy bought you that you are better than me. I think she is better than you because she is a decent human being, Tyrell said coldly, which is more than I can say for a man who would sell his own stepdaughter. Jacob's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, but Tyrell was faster, his Colt drawn and aimed before Jacob could clear leather. I would not, Tyrell said softly. I would really, truly not. Several passers-by had stopped to watch, and the sheriff, a burly man named Coleman, came hurrying over. What is going on here? Nothing, Sheriff, Jacob said, stepping back with his hands raised. Just a misunderstanding. Then move along, Sheriff Coleman said sternly. I do not want any trouble in my town. Jacob slunk away, but not before giving Rosalie one last poisonous look. She found herself trembling, and Tyrell gently touched her elbow. He cannot hurt you any more, he said. I will not let him. On the ride back to the ranch, Rosalie's mind was spinning. Everything had changed so quickly. Just yesterday morning she had been a virtual slave, and now she was wearing new clothes and being protected by a man who seemed to have no ulterior motives. It was almost too much to believe. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Rosalie moved some of her things into the main cabin's kitchen area, where she could cook more easily. She insisted on preparing meals for both of them, and Tyrell did not argue. She discovered he had a taste for simple, hearty food and an appreciation for her apple pie that bordered on reverence. In return, Tyrell taught her about the horses. He had 8 of them, ranging from young colts to a wise old mare named Sadie. He was in the business of breaking wild horses and training them for ranch work, then selling them to local ranchers and miners. It was hard, dangerous work, but he had a gift for it. Rosalie would watch from the corral fence as he worked with a skittish bronco, his voice low and soothing, his movements patient and sure. You have to understand them, he explained one afternoon as Rosalie helped him brush down a young gelding. Horses are not stupid. They are afraid because the world is full of things that can hurt them. You have to show them you are not one of those things, that they can trust you. It takes time, but it is worth it. Rosalie thought about how that philosophy applied to people too to her. She had been like a wild horse when Tyrell found her, ready to bolt or fight, trusting no one. But slowly, day by day, he was showing her that not all people were like Jacob, that some could be kind without expecting anything in return. 2 weeks after the day she had been traded for a horse, Rosalie was kneading bread dough in the main cabin when Tyrell came in from the barn, his expression troubled. "What is wrong?" she asked, dusting flour from her hands. "There is a bad storm coming," he said, moving to the window to study the darkening sky. "The temperature is dropping fast and I can smell snow on the wind. This is going to be a big one. Should we bring the horses into the barn? Already done. I have been preparing all morning." He turned to look at her. "You should stay here in the main cabin tonight. The storage cabin is good, but if this storm is as bad as I think it will be, I would feel better knowing you were somewhere warmer and sturdier." Rosalie felt her cheeks heat. "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. There is a loft upstairs where I sleep. You can have the main room with the big fireplace. It will be warmer and safer." The storm hit that evening with a ferocity that shocked even Tyrell, who had lived through many harsh winters. The wind howled like a living thing, battering the cabin walls and piling snow against the windows. Rosalie and Tyrell sat by the fire, listening to the storm's fury, and for the first time since they had met, they really talked. Tyrell told her about growing up in Kentucky, the son of a horse breeder and a schoolteacher. He spoke of joining the army at 22, full of idealistic notions about duty and honor, and how those notions had been shattered on the blood-soaked plains of Montana. He talked about his parents, both gone now, and how he missed them every day in turn. Rosalie told him about her childhood in Illinois, about her mother who had been a seamstress and her real father who had died in a railroad accident when she was 12. She spoke of how her mother had married Jacob Winters 2 years later, desperate for security, and how that decision had led to nothing but misery. "She tried to protect me," Rosalie said, staring into the fire, "but Jacob was cruel to her too. When she got sick last spring, he would not even pay for a doctor. She died in that cold little room and I could do nothing to help her." Tyrell reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm and comforting. "That was not your fault." "I know," Rosalie said, but her voice broke. "But it feels like it sometimes. I feel like I should have done more, should have found a way to save her." "You were trying to survive," Tyrell said gently. "There is no shame in that." They sat there by the fire, hands linked, while the storm raged outside. Rosalie felt something profound passing between them, a connection that went beyond gratitude or obligation. When she finally went to lie down on the settee Tyrell had made up for her with blankets and pillows, she could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers. The storm lasted 3 days. During that time, Rosalie and Tyrell were trapped together in the cabin, venturing out only to care for the horses and bring in more firewood. They played cards, read aloud from Tyrell's small collection of books, and cooked together in the cramped kitchen. Rosalie found herself laughing more than she had in years, and she caught Tyrell watching her with an expression she could not quite name. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after supper, Tyrell said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What do you want for your future?" "Not what you think you should want, but what you really want, if you could have anything." Rosalie thought about this carefully. "I want to feel safe," she said finally. "I want to wake up without being afraid. I want to work hard at something I care about and know that the fruits of my labor are mine. And I want—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "I want someone to look at me the way you looked at me when you said I was worth more than 1,000 horses. Like I mattered, like I was precious." Tyrell's eyes were intense in the firelight. "You are precious, Rosalie. You matter more than you know." "You are the first person in a long time to make me believe that," she whispered. He moved closer, still giving her space to pull away if she wanted. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you have been through hell and probably do not want any man complicating your life right now. But I need you to know that these past 2 weeks, having you here, they have been the best weeks I have had in years. You make this place feel like a home instead of just somewhere to sleep." Rosalie's heart was pounding. "Tyrell, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I am not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know how I feel." But Rosalie reached out and took his face in her hands, studying his features in the dancing firelight. She saw strength there and kindness and a loneliness that matched her own. "You make me feel safe," she said. "You make me feel like maybe the world is not as cruel as I thought it was." Tyrell covered her hands with his own. "I would never hurt you, Rosalie. I swear that on everything I hold sacred." "I know," she said, and she meant it. Then, gathering her courage, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, both of them testing this new territory. But then Tyrell pulled her closer, and Rosalie melted into his embrace, feeling his arms wrap around her like a fortress against all the cruelty of the world. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the day I first saw you in town last summer," Tyrell admitted. "You were carrying a basket of laundry and the sun was in your hair, and I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "You never said anything," Rosalie said, surprised. "You were another man's stepdaughter, living under his roof. It would not have been proper, and you always looked so sad and scared. I figured the last thing you needed was another man making demands on you." Rosalie felt tears spring to her eyes. "You are a good man, Tyrell Anderson." "I try to be," he said softly, "and you make me want to be better." They stayed up late into the night, talking and kissing by the fire, exploring this new dimension of their relationship. Tyrell was gentle and patient, never pushing for more than Rosalie was ready to give. When they finally parted to go to their separate sleeping spaces, Rosalie lay awake in the darkness, her fingers touching her lips, marveling at how much her life had changed. When the storm finally broke on the fourth day, the world outside was transformed into a winter wonderland. The snow had drifted as high as the windows in some places, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Tyrell and Rosalie spent the morning digging out paths to the barn and the storage cabin, working side by side in companionable silence. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Tyrell said, "I need to go into town tomorrow to pick up some supplies and check on a few things. Would you like to come with me?" "I would," Rosalie said, then hesitated. "Do you think people will talk about us, I mean?" "Probably," Tyrell said honestly. "Small towns are like that. Does it bother you?" Rosalie thought about it. A month ago she would have been terrified of being the subject of gossip, but now, with Tyrell by her side, she found she did not care what people thought. "No," she said. "Let them talk." The trip to town the next day was enlightening. Several people greeted them warmly, including Mrs. Chen at the general store and Sheriff Coleman. But others, particularly some of the older, more conservative women, gave them disapproving looks. Rosalie held her head high, refusing to be cowed. They were leaving the feed store when they encountered Jacob again. He was clearly drunk, swaying on the boardwalk, his eyes bloodshot and mean. "There is the whore and her cowboy," he slurred loudly. "Playing house out there, are you? Everyone knows what you are doing." Tyrell's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Rosalie stepped forward. "What we are doing is none of your concern, Jacob Winters. You gave up any right to have an opinion about my life when you traded me for a horse. Now get out of our way." Jacob's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful little—" Sheriff Coleman appeared as if summoned, his hand on his gun. "That is enough, Winters. Move along before I lock you up for public drunkenness." Jacob stumbled away, muttering curses, and the sheriff tipped his hat to Rosalie and Tyrell. "Do not let him bother you, Miss Anderson. The whole town knows what he did, and most folks are on your side." "Thank you, Sheriff," Rosalie said, feeling a warm glow of pride. She had stood up to Jacob, and the sky had not fallen. She was not powerless anymore. On the ride home, Tyrell was quiet, and Rosalie finally asked what was wrong. "I hate that you have to deal with that," he said. "With people judging you, with Jacob saying those things." "I can handle it," Rosalie said firmly. "I am not the scared girl I was a month ago." "You helped me find my strength again." Tyrell reached back and squeezed her hand. "You always had that strength. You just needed someone to remind you it was there." As winter deepened, Rosalie and Tyrell's relationship grew stronger. They were careful about propriety, with Rosalie continuing to sleep in the storage cabin most nights, but everyone knew they were courting. Tyrell was teaching her to ride properly, and she was proving to be a natural horsewoman. Together, they cared for the animals and kept the ranch running through the harsh weather. It was in late January, during a brief warm spell that melted some of the snow, that Tyrell asked Rosalie to go for a ride with him. They saddled up two of the gentler horses and headed into the hills, following a trail that wound through ponderosa pines and granite outcroppings. The Black Hills were beautiful in winter, stark and wild and unforgiving. Tyrell led her to a high meadow where the snow had melted enough to reveal brown grass and a few hardy wildflowers. From here, they could see for miles in every direction, the landscape rolling away in waves of white and dark green. "This is one of my favorite places," Tyrell said, dismounting and helping Rosalie down. "I come here when I need to think." They stood together, looking out over the vast expanse, and Rosalie felt a profound sense of peace. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "Not as beautiful as you," Tyrell said, and when she turned to him, he was down on one knee in the snow. Rosalie's heart stopped. "I know we have only known each other a few months," Tyrell said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I know that by all conventional standards we should wait longer. But I have lived long enough to know that life is uncertain, and when you find something precious, you hold on to it. Rosalie Anderson, you are the most precious thing I have ever found. You are brave and kind and strong, and you make me want to be the best man I can be. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He pulled out a simple gold band, not fancy but solid and real. Rosalie felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Tyrell, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally pulled apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and Rosalie marveled at how right it felt. "I do not have much to offer you," Tyrell said seriously. "Just a small ranch, some horses, and a man who will love you until his dying day." "That is more than I ever dreamed of having," Rosalie said, touching his face. "You gave me back my life, Tyrell. You showed me that I was worth more than how I was treated. I love you for that, and for 1,000 other reasons." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. That night, Rosalie moved her things into the main cabin permanently, and they sat together planning their future. They would get married in the spring, Tyrell said, when the weather was better and they could have a proper celebration. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Tyrell was in town picking up feed when he ran into an old army friend named Samuel Drake. Over coffee, Samuel told him about a large tract of land for sale about 20 miles north. Good grazing land with a stream running through it and a sturdy house already built. It was being sold by a widow who was moving east to live with her daughter, and she was asking a fair price. "You should look at it," Samuel urged. "With your skill with horses and a place like that, you could really build something. Have a family, raise kids in a real home." Tyrell thought about Rosalie and the cramped cabin they were living in. He thought about the future they were planning, about children playing in a yard and horses grazing in green fields. By the time he got home, he had made up his mind. "I want to show you something," he told Rosalie that evening. "Would you be willing to take a trip with me tomorrow? It will mean being gone overnight, but I promise it will be worth it." Rosalie agreed, curious about this mysterious excursion. They set out early the next morning, bundled against the cold, with supplies for 2 days packed on a pack horse. The ride took most of the day, following roads and trails that gradually led them into more open country. As the sun was beginning to lower, they came over a rise and Rosalie gasped. Spread out before them was a beautiful valley, sheltered by hills on 3 sides. A good-sized stream, partially frozen, wound through the land. And there, near a stand of cottonwood trees, stood a 2-story house with a barn and several outbuildings. "What is this place?" Rosalie asked. "It could be our place," Tyrell said. "If you want it. The widow who owns it is selling, and I have enough saved to make a down payment. It is more land than we have now, better grazing, and that house has 4 bedrooms, plenty of room for a family." Rosalie looked at the house, trying to imagine it. "Can we look inside?" Mrs. Warren, the widow, was a kind woman in her 60s who welcomed them warmly and showed them through the house. It was well built and solid, with a large kitchen, a parlor with a stone fireplace, and upstairs, those 4 bedrooms Tyrell had mentioned. The furniture was included in the sale, and while it was worn, it was good quality. My husband and I built this place 30 years ago, Mrs. Warren said as they stood in the kitchen. We raised 5 children here, and it has been a good home. I hate to leave it, but I cannot manage it alone, and my daughter worries about me being so isolated. I would like to see it go to a young couple who will fill it with life again. Rosalie and Tyrell exchanged glances, and Rosalie saw the hope in his eyes. "Could we talk about it?" she asked Mrs. Warren. "Of course, dear. Take your time." They walked out to the barn, where Tyrell's friend Samuel was waiting with his wife Emma, who had come to help Mrs. Warren pack. Emma was a cheerful woman with a round face and sparkling eyes. "What do you think?" Tyrell asked Rosalie when they were alone in the barn. "I think it is wonderful," Rosalie said honestly. "But can we afford it?" "I have been saving for years," Tyrell admitted. "Ever since I left the army, I have put away nearly every penny I could spare. I have enough for a down payment and some left over for supplies and to keep us going while we get established. It will be tight for a while, but if we work hard, we can make it work." Rosalie thought about what it would mean to have a real home, not just a cabin but a place they could grow into, raise children in, grow old in. "Then yes," she said, "let us do it." The deal was struck that evening over Mrs. Warren's pot roast. They would take possession of the property in March, giving Mrs. Warren time to finish her preparations to move. Tyrell would pay half the price upfront and the rest over the next 3 years. It was a risk, a huge commitment, but as they rode back to the ranch the next day, both felt a sense of excitement about the future. "We should get married before we move," Tyrell said as they crested a hill and looked back at their new valley. "I want you to come to that house as my wife, not just someone I am courting." "When?" Rosalie asked, her heart soaring. "As soon as we can arrange it. February sometime. Why wait?" They returned to Custer and immediately began making plans. The wedding would be simple, held in the small church on the edge of town. Rosalie would make her own dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored wool. Tyrell asked Samuel to stand up with him, and Rosalie asked Emma, who she had become friendly with during their visit. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Rosalie sewed her dress by firelight in the evenings while Tyrell worked on building them a proper bed frame for the new house. They made lists of supplies they would need, animals to purchase, repairs to make. It was exhausting and exhilarating all at once. 3 days before the wedding, Rosalie was in town buying ribbon for her dress when she saw Jacob Winters across the street. He was even more disheveled than the last time she had seen him, his clothes dirty and his face haggard. For a moment, their eyes met, and Rosalie saw something in his expression that might have been regret. But then he turned and walked away, disappearing into a saloon, and Rosalie felt nothing but pity for him. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the temperature well below freezing but the sky a brilliant blue. Rosalie dressed in the cabin with Emma's help, her hands shaking as she buttoned the cream wool dress she had worked so hard on. Emma had helped her style her dark hair in an elegant updo, and she wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she owned. "You look beautiful," Emma said warmly. "Tyrell is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Rosalie said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The church was small and drafty, but it was full of people. Rosalie was surprised to see how many had come, miners and ranchers and townspeople, all dressed in their Sunday best. Mrs. Chen was there, and Sheriff Coleman, and Mrs. Warren, who had made the journey from the valley just for this. Even some of the women who had given Rosalie disapproving looks were there, their expressions softened now. But Rosalie only had eyes for Tyrell, standing at the front of the church in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his eyes fixed on her as she walked down the aisle. There was such love in his gaze that Rosalie felt her heart might burst. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through hardship and joy. When it came time for the vows, Tyrell's voice was strong and sure. I, Tyrell Anderson, take you, Rosalie Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by you all the days of my life. You are precious to me beyond measure, worth more than any earthly treasure, and I will spend my life proving that to you. Rosalie's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her own vows. I, Rosalie Anderson, take you, Tyrell Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand by you all the days of my life. You saved me when I had lost all hope, and I will be forever grateful for your courage and kindness. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Tyrell kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in the congregation sighed. Rosalie felt like she was floating as they walked back down the aisle together, husband and wife, partners in this new adventure. The reception was held at the town hall, and to Rosalie's surprise, the community had come together to provide food and music. There was roasted venison, fresh bread, pies and cakes, and even a fiddler who played lively tunes while people danced. Rosalie danced with Tyrell, her husband, and felt happier than she had ever been. As the evening wore on and they prepared to leave, Mrs. Chen pulled Rosalie aside. I am glad you found happiness, dear, she said, pressing a small package into Rosalie's hands. You deserved better than what life gave you, and I am glad Tyrell saw your worth. Inside the package was a beautiful quilt, hand-stitched with a pattern of interlocking rings. For your new home, Mrs. Chen said. May it keep you warm and remind you that you have friends here. Rosalie hugged the older woman, tears in her eyes. Thank you for everything. That night, in the cabin that would soon cease to be their home, Tyrell and Rosalie began their life as husband and wife. Tyrell was gentle and patient, making sure Rosalie felt cherished and safe. They lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about their dreams for the future. I want to fill that house with children, Tyrell said, stroking her hair. I want to teach our sons to be honorable men and our daughters to be strong women who know their worth. How many children? Rosalie asked, amused. As many as God sees fit to bless us with, Tyrell said. Though I would be content with just you if that is all we have. I think we will have a full house, Rosalie said, placing his hand on her stomach. I am almost certain I am already carrying your child. Tyrell sat up, his eyes wide. Are you sure? Not completely, but I have missed my monthly time and I have been feeling strange in the mornings. If I am right, the baby would come in late summer or early fall. Tyrell pulled her close, his arms tight around her. A baby, he breathed. Our baby. Rosalie, you have made me the happiest man alive. They spent the next few weeks preparing for the move, packing up the small cabin and making arrangements to transport their belongings and animals to the new property. It was hard, exhausting work, but they tackled it together, always finding time to laugh and love despite the challenges. In early March, they made the move to what they had decided to call the Anderson Valley Ranch. The house welcomed them with open doors, and they spent the first week scrubbing and cleaning, making it truly theirs. Rosalie hung Mrs. Chen's quilt on the bed in the master bedroom, and Tyrell built shelves for their few books and treasured possessions. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, revealing green grass and wildflowers, they worked to get the ranch running. Tyrell brought over the horses from the old place, and they purchased cattle and chickens to add to their livestock. Rosalie planted a kitchen garden, working the soil with her hands, feeling connected to the earth in a way she never had before. Samuel and Emma became frequent visitors, and Rosalie treasured Emma's friendship and advice, especially as her pregnancy became more obvious. She was indeed carrying Tyrell's child, and both were overjoyed. One warm evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Tyrell said, "Do you ever think about that day in December, when your stepfather tried to trade you for a horse?" "Sometimes," Rosalie admitted. "It seems like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In a way it did," Tyrell said. "You are not that frightened girl anymore. You are my wife, the mother of my child, and the strongest woman I know." Rosalie leaned her head on his shoulder. "I could not have become this person without you. You saw something in me worth saving." "I saw someone worth more than 1,000 horses," Tyrell said, echoing the words he had spoken that cold December day. "And I was right." The summer was glorious, warm, and full of life. The ranch thrived under their care, and Rosalie's belly grew round with their child. Tyrell was attentive and loving, constantly worrying about her health and comfort. He built a cradle for the baby, carving it from cedar wood and polishing it until it gleamed. In late August, on a night when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Rosalie went into labor. Emma was there to help, having come to stay a week earlier to be ready for this moment. Tyrell paced the kitchen, driven half mad with worry, until finally, in the early hours of the morning, he heard the thin, angry wail of a newborn. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her face beaming. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong son, and Rosalie is fine." Tyrell took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Rosalie propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. He approached slowly, almost afraid this perfect moment might shatter. "Meet your son," Rosalie said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny, perfect face with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to already be focused on the world around him. Tyrell sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out with one finger to stroke the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "He is perfect," he breathed. "He is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Rosalie asked. They had discussed this at length over the past months, but now, looking at his son, Tyrell knew with certainty. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Anderson, after your father." Rosalie's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. Your father was a good man who loved you. I want our son to carry that legacy." Tyrell carefully took the baby, cradling him in his strong arms with surprising gentleness. "Hello, Thomas. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you to be a good man." Little Thomas yawned, a tiny sound that made both parents laugh through their tears. Tyrell carefully handed him back to Rosalie and lay down beside them, his arm around his wife, his eyes on his son. They stayed like that as dawn broke over the valley, a family together, whole and happy. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Tyrell was a devoted father. He would walk the floor with the baby for hours, singing old army songs in a soft voice, and Rosalie would watch them with a full heart. As autumn arrived and the leaves turned gold and red, they had the baby baptized in the same church where they had been married. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate with them, and the house was full of laughter and love. That winter was harsh, but the Anderson family weathered it together. On Christmas morning, Rosalie gave Tyrell a gift she had been working on for months, a quilt made from scraps of fabric that told the story of their life together. Each square represented something significant: the horse that had indirectly brought them together, the cabin where they had fallen in love, the house that was now their home, and at the center, a square with 3 figures, a man, a woman, and a baby. "It is beautiful," Tyrell said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are so talented, Rosalie." "I wanted to capture our story," she said, "so we never forget how far we have come." Tyrell pulled her close, careful not to wake Thomas, who was sleeping in his cradle nearby. "I could never forget. You and Thomas are my whole world." The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The ranch prospered under their care, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the region. Tyrell's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and people came from as far as Montana and Wyoming to buy his animals. When Thomas was 2, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, dark-haired beauty they named Lily. 2 years after that came another son, James, and then 3 years later, twin girls, Sarah and Grace. The house that had once seemed so large was now filled to bursting with children, laughter, and love. Tyrell proved to be an exceptional father, patient and kind but firm when needed. He taught his sons to work hard and treat women with respect, and he taught his daughters that they were just as capable and valuable as any man. Rosalie thrived as a mother and rancher's wife. She ran the household with efficiency and love, taught the children their letters and numbers, and still found time to help Tyrell with the horses and cattle. The frightened, broken girl who had been traded for a horse was gone, replaced by a confident, capable woman who knew her worth. On a warm evening in June 1886, 10 years after that fateful December day, Rosalie and Tyrell sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 9, was teaching James to rope a fence post. Lily, 7, was reading a story to the 5-year-old twins, her voice clear and confident. "Can you believe this is our life?" Rosalie asked, leaning against Tyrell's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like a dream," Tyrell admitted. "But then I look at them and I know it is real. We built this, Rosalie, together." "I never thought I could be this happy," Rosalie said softly. "There were days when I was living with Jacob, when I thought about just walking into the winter cold and not coming back. I could not see a future worth living for." Tyrell tightened his arm around her. "I am so glad you held on. I am so glad I was there that day." "You saved my life," Rosalie said, turning to look at him. "In every way a person can be saved." "No," Tyrell said, touching her face gently. "We saved each other. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, to be better than I was. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. I was just drifting before you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. After a while, Thomas came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow, please? James has never been, and I want to show him the good spots." Tyrell ruffled his son's hair. "I think we can arrange that, but you will need to dig up some worms tonight." "I will, thank you, Papa." Thomas hugged his father fiercely, then ran off to tell his brother the good news. "He is so much like you," Rosalie observed, "kind and patient and always thinking of others." "He has your courage," Tyrell countered, "and your stubborn streak." Rosalie laughed, the sound bright and free. "I suppose he gets the best of both of us." As the evening deepened and the children were called in for supper, Rosalie thought about how much had changed in a decade. The town of Custer had grown, becoming more civilized with schools and churches and proper law enforcement. The wild, dangerous edge of the frontier was slowly being tamed. Jacob Winters had died 5 years earlier, drinking himself to death in a saloon in Deadwood. Rosalie had felt nothing when she heard the news, not satisfaction or grief, just a kind of distant pity for a man who had thrown away every chance at happiness. She thought about her mother sometimes, wishing she could have lived to see her daughter's happiness, to meet her grandchildren. But she liked to think her mother was watching somehow, proud of the life Rosalie had built. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Rosalie and Tyrell lay together in the big bed under Mrs. Chen's quilt, talking softly. "I have been thinking," Tyrell said. "Thomas is getting old enough to handle more responsibility around the ranch. I thought I might start teaching him the finer points of horse training." "He would love that," Rosalie said. "He worships you, you know. He wants to be just like you." "I hope he is better than me," Tyrell said seriously. "I hope all our children are better, kinder, wiser. That is what we are supposed to do, is it not? Leave the world better than we found it." "I think you are already doing that," Rosalie said, kissing him softly. "Every day." The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Anderson family grew and changed with them. Rosalie taught the girls to sew and cook and manage a household, but she also taught them to ride and rope and shoot. "The world is changing," she told them. "Women are starting to have more opportunities. I want you to be ready for whatever comes." Tyrell taught the boys about horses and cattle and the land, but he also taught them about honor and integrity and treating people with respect. "A man's word is his bond," he would say, "and a man who cannot be trusted is not worth knowing." In 1889, when Thomas was 12, he asked his parents to tell him the full story of how they met. Rosalie and Tyrell exchanged glances, and then, together, they told him everything. About Jacob trading Rosalie for a horse, about Tyrell stepping in and declaring she was worth more than 1,000 horses, about the hard winter and the slow building of trust and love. Thomas listened with wide eyes, and when they finished, he said, "Papa, you were so brave." "And Mama, you are the strongest person I know." "Your mother is the brave one," Tyrell corrected. "I just did what any decent person would do." "Not everyone would have done it," Rosalie said softly. "Most people walked past me that day without a second glance." "Your father saw someone who needed help and he did not hesitate." "I want to be like that," Thomas said seriously. "I want to help people who need it." And he did. As Thomas grew into a young man, he developed his father's sense of justice and his mother's fierce protectiveness of the vulnerable. He became known in the region as someone who could be counted on, who would stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. The other children followed similar paths. Lily became a teacher, opening a school for children in the surrounding ranches. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for business. The twins, Sarah and Grace, were inseparable and brilliant, eventually going east to study nursing, determined to bring modern medicine back to their community. Through it all, Rosalie and Tyrell remained the steady center of the family, their love growing deeper and richer with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were harsh winters and dry summers, illness and injury, financial setbacks and personal losses. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from the family they had built. In 1895, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Tyrell took Rosalie back to the high meadow where he had proposed all those years ago. It was summer now, and the meadow was full of wildflowers, a sea of purple and yellow and white. "I wanted to bring you back here," Tyrell said as they stood hand in hand, looking out over the view, "to the place where our life really began." "Our life began on a cold December day in Custer," Rosalie corrected gently, "when you told me I was worth more than 1,000 horses." "And I still believe that," Tyrell said, turning to face her. "You are worth more than anything in this world. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. These 20 years with you have been the greatest gift I could imagine." Rosalie felt tears on her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you, Tyrell Anderson. I loved you when you first defended me in the street, and I love you more with every passing day." They kissed there in the meadow, surrounded by wildflowers and birdsong, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life of meaning and purpose. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Rosalie thought about the girl she had been, so young and scared and certain that life held nothing but pain. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that a cowboy would see her worth and fight for her, that she would find love and happiness and a home. But perhaps, she thought, that was the beauty of life. You never knew when salvation might appear, when someone might look at you and see not what you were in that moment, but what you could become. Tyrell had seen her potential when she could not see it herself, and she had helped him heal from his own wounds and build something lasting. The years continued to pass. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with new energy and laughter. Thomas married a sweet girl named Hannah and gave them 3 grandchildren. Lily married a fellow teacher and had 2 daughters. James married a rancher's daughter and expanded the family holdings. The twins both married in their 30s, Sarah to a doctor and Grace to a lawyer, and both had small families of their own. Rosalie and Tyrell watched their family grow with deep satisfaction, knowing they had succeeded in their most important work. They had raised good, kind, capable people who were making the world better in their own ways. In 1906, on a crisp autumn morning, Rosalie woke to find Tyrell already up and dressed, standing at the window of their bedroom looking out over the valley. She joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything," he said softly. "The first time I saw you, the day I realized I loved you, our wedding day, the births of our children, all the years we have had together. I am 60 years old, Rosalie. We have been married 31 years, and I cannot think of a single thing I would change." "Not even the hard parts?" Rosalie asked. "The winter we almost lost the entire herd, when Lily had pneumonia and we thought we might lose her, when James broke his leg." "Not even those," Tyrell said firmly, "because we got through them together and they made us stronger. Every challenge we faced as partners. That is what matters." Rosalie laid her head on his shoulder, looking out at the land they had cultivated together. The ranch was thriving, the family was happy and healthy, and they were together. What more could anyone ask for? That afternoon, the whole family gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition that had started when the children were small and continued now that they had children of their own. The big dining table that Tyrell had built 20 years ago was crowded with people, 3 generations of Andersons, talking and laughing and passing dishes. Rosalie looked around the table at all these beloved faces and felt overwhelming gratitude. Her granddaughter Eliza, Thomas's oldest, was telling a story about her adventures at school. Little Henry, James's youngest, was trying to sneak extra biscuits. The twins' children were engaged in an animated debate about something Rosalie could not quite follow. And at the head of the table sat Tyrell, his hair now silver but his eyes still sharp and kind, laughing at something his son James had said. He caught Rosalie's eye and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. After dinner, as the women cleaned up and the men took the children outside to play, Emma, who had remained Rosalie's closest friend through all the years, pulled her aside. "You have built something beautiful here," Emma said, gesturing to the house full of love and laughter. "I remember that scared girl in the threadbare dress, and look at you now. You are the matriarch of a family dynasty." "I had help," Rosalie said, looking out the window at Tyrell, who was teaching his youngest grandson to throw a rope. "I could not have done any of this without him." "He would say the same about you," Emma pointed out. "That is what makes it work. You lift each other up." As the sun set over the valley that evening, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. Rosalie and Tyrell stood on the porch waving goodbye to their children and grandchildren. When the last wagon had disappeared down the road, they sat together on the porch swing Tyrell had built, holding hands in the gathering darkness. "You remember what you said to me that first night in the cabin?" Rosalie asked. "After the big storm." "I said a lot of things," Tyrell said, thinking back. "You asked me what I wanted for my future. And I said I wanted to feel safe, to wake up without being afraid, to work at something I cared about, and to have someone look at me like I mattered. And did you get those things?" Tyrell asked, though he knew the answer. "Every single one," Rosalie said. "And so much more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me all of that, Tyrell. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Tyrell said, pulling her close. "I was lost before you, Rosalie. I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and the horses in the corral nickered softly. The wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, carrying the scent of grass and earth and home. "I would do it all again," Rosalie said softly. "Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of fear and doubt. Because it all led here to this life with you." "So would I," Tyrell said, kissing the top of her head. "1,000 times over." As they sat together under the vast Montana sky, Rosalie thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that cold December day when she had been traded for a horse to this warm autumn evening surrounded by family and love, it had been an incredible journey. There had been pain and loss along the way, but also joy and triumph, and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She thought about all the women who were still trapped like she had been, stuck in situations they could not escape, believing they had no value and no future. She wished she could tell them all that salvation might come from the most unexpected places, that there were still good people in the world who would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Most of all, she wished she could tell them that they were worth more than they knew, worth more than how they were treated, worth fighting for and believing in. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and new challenges. Rosalie and Tyrell grew older together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They watched their grandchildren grow into fine young adults, and eventually, great-grandchildren arrived, a fourth generation of Andersons to carry on the legacy they had built. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1926, the family threw them a grand celebration. Nearly 100 people gathered at the ranch, family and friends from across the region, all coming to honor the couple who had built such an enduring love story. Tyrell, now 80 years old but still sharp as ever, stood to make a speech. "50 years ago," he began, his voice still strong, "I made the best decision of my life. I saw a young woman being treated as property, and I could not stand by and let it happen. I told her she was worth more than 1,000 horses, and I meant it with every fiber of my being." He looked at Rosalie, seated beside him, still beautiful at 76 with silver hair and eyes that sparkled with love and life. "What I did not know then was that she was worth more than I could imagine. She was worth more than all the gold in the Black Hills, more than every horse I ever trained, more than any treasure this earth could offer. She gave me a family, a home, a purpose, and 50 years of the deepest love a man could know." Rosalie stood and took his hand, her own eyes shining with tears. "And you gave me my life back," she said. "You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I had been discarded, loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Everything good in my life stems from that December day when you stepped forward and declared my worth. They kissed to thunderous applause, and then the celebration continued long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren asked to hear the story of how they met, and Rosalie and Tyrell told it once more, their voices overlapping and complementing each other as they had for half a century. That night, as they lay in bed in the house they had made a home, Tyrell said, "I have been thinking about what happens after." "After what?" Rosalie asked, though she knew. "After we are gone. I want to make sure the ranch stays in the family, that all we built continues." "It will," Rosalie assured him. "We have raised our children well, and they have raised theirs. The Anderson name will endure, and with it the values we tried to instill. Kindness, integrity, hard work, and the belief that every person has worth." "Especially that last one," Tyrell said. "I want our descendants to always remember that people are not property, that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." "They will remember," Rosalie promised, "because we lived it every day. Actions speak louder than words, and we showed them what it means to value people, to fight for the vulnerable, to build a life based on love and mutual respect." Tyrell pulled her close, and they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had for 50 years, two souls so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The seasons turned, and Rosalie and Tyrell continued to live at the ranch, though they gradually handed more responsibilities to their children and grandchildren. They spent their days sitting on the porch, watching the land they loved, telling stories to the great-grandchildren who gathered at their feet, and marveling at the life they had built together. On a warm summer evening in 1928, Tyrell passed away peacefully in his sleep, Rosalie beside him holding his hand. He was 82 years old and had lived a full, rich life. The entire community turned out for his funeral, testimony to the impact he had made on the world around him. Rosalie grieved deeply for the loss of her partner, her best friend, her great love. But she was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all carried pieces of Tyrell's legacy. She could see him in Thomas's kindness, in James's work ethic, in the twins' sharp minds and compassionate hearts, in every descendant who bore the Anderson name. She lived for 2 more years, spending her days writing down the family history so future generations would know where they came from and what they stood for. She wrote about that cold December day in 1876, about a cowboy who had seen her worth when no one else did, about the life they had built together against all odds. On a crisp autumn morning in 1930, Rosalie passed away quietly at the age of 80, surrounded by her family. Her last words were, "Tell Tyrell I am coming home." They buried her beside Tyrell on a hill overlooking the valley, under a simple stone that read, "Rosalie and Tyrell Anderson, worth more than all the world could offer." The Anderson Valley Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, always staying in the family. The story of how it began, of a woman traded for a horse and a cowboy who declared her worth, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Thomas's great-great-grandson, in a college essay written in 1975, would write about his ancestors. "My great-great-great-grandfather saw someone in need and acted without hesitation. He did not think about the cost or the risk or what others might say. He simply saw a human being treated as property, and he could not allow it to continue. In doing so, he not only saved one woman's life, but created a legacy that has touched hundreds of descendants. He showed us that one person standing up for what is right can change the world, or at least their corner of it." And in a very real sense, Tyrell and Rosalie's story did change the world. Their descendants went on to become teachers and doctors and lawyers and activists, people who fought for justice and equality and the inherent worth of every human being. The values instilled in that first generation were passed down through the decades, creating a family tree full of good, kind, capable people who made their communities better. The ranch itself stood as a monument to what could be built when two people truly loved and respected each other, when they worked together toward common goals, when they refused to let hardship defeat them. For over a century, the Anderson Valley Ranch remained in the family, a working ranch that also served as a gathering place for family reunions and celebrations, a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. In the barn where Tyrell had once trained horses, his great-great-grandchildren now ran a program teaching at-risk youth horsemanship and ranch skills, giving troubled kids a chance to learn responsibility and self-worth. It was called the Worth More Than Horses program, named after Tyrell's famous declaration, and it had helped hundreds of young people over the years. The house that Rosalie had made a home was preserved carefully, with many of the original furnishings still in place. Mrs. Chen's quilt hung on the wall in what had been Rosalie and Tyrell's bedroom, now a kind of museum to their memory. Visitors could see the cradle Tyrell had carved for baby Thomas, the books they had read together by the fire, the simple gold wedding band Rosalie had worn for 54 years. But more than the physical artifacts, it was the story that endured. Every Anderson child grew up hearing about that December day in 1876, about a young woman's despair and a cowboy's courage, about love growing in the harsh soil of the frontier, about a life built on mutual respect and partnership. And in that story, future generations found inspiration. They learned that circumstances do not define you, that one person's belief in your worth can change your life, that love and hard work can overcome almost any obstacle. They learned that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is difficult or costly. They learned that building a life of meaning requires both courage and compassion. The story of Rosalie and Tyrell Anderson became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of human dignity, to the importance of seeing and valuing each person as an individual with inherent worth. It was a reminder that, in a world that often tried to reduce people to their utility or their monetary value, there were still those who understood that every human being was precious beyond measure. On the hilltop where they were buried, the Anderson family maintained a small garden, planted with the same wildflowers that had grown in the meadow where Tyrell proposed. Every year on their anniversary, family members gathered there to remember and honor the couple who had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the sun painted the valley in shades of gold, visitors to the ranch swore they could feel the presence of Rosalie and Tyrell, still watching over the land they loved, still together after all these years, their love story echoing through the generations as a reminder that some things, some people, are worth more than all the treasures the world could offer. Their legacy was not just in the land they had cultivated or the family they had raised, but in the simple, profound truth they had lived every day. That every person has worth, that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and that one moment of courage can change not just one life, but countless lives for generations to come. And so the story ended where it began, with worth and value, and the unshakable belief that people are precious beyond measure. From a cold December day in a rough frontier town to a legacy that spanned more than a century, Rosalie and Tyrell Anderson had proven that love, courage, and human dignity could triumph over even the darkest circumstances. They had built something beautiful together, something lasting, something that would continue to inspire and guide their descendants long after they were gone. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they could have given, not just to their family, but to the world. The example of a life well lived, a love well honored, and a truth well defended. That every person, no matter their circumstances, is worth more than 1,000 horses, worth more than all the gold in the earth, worth fighting for, believing in, and loving with all your heart.